On AM 650 KGAB.
And good morning. Welcome once again to AM 650 KGAB Weekend in Wyoming program. My name is Doug Randall. We have a multi-part program for you this morning, starting with Cheyenne City Councilman Rocky Case. Coming up at 11:30, we'll have economist Sven Larson talking about some of the likely pending proposals in the Wyoming legislature. Coming up at 12 noon, we'll visit with an official from the Safehouse program in Cheyenne, talk about what Safehouse does, local domestic violence issues, that sort of thing. And then at 12:30, we'll open up the phones to talk about what you want to discuss. In the meantime, Cheyenne City Councilman Rocky Case. Welcome back, Rocky.
Good morning. Thanks for having me this morning.
Now, you were going to come in specifically this morning to talk about an ordinance that I guess has not quite gone to council yet, but is in the works, dealing with mayoral spending. Do I have that right?
Well, elected spending.
Elected
really.
spending,
And, when I was first sworn in about 3 years ago, looking at the employee handbook and things along these lines, and I guess the tradition or the opinion was that none of these rules apply to elected individuals. Mm-hmm. And that kind of made me scratch my head. Well, why would you have a set of rules apply to your core group of employees, but not the CEO of the city and the city council? Mm-hmm. And I didn't really think a whole lot of it at that point. City council members don't really spend money on a day-to-day basis, like right. As par for the course. And so as a result of some interesting things that were highlighted last year in terms of spending, I decided we need to take a hard look at what are we spending money on, how are we spending it, is it appropriate? Mm-hmm. And my first step was to take a look at the local elected individuals handbook from the Wyoming Association of Municipalities, and they spell out very clearly what is appropriate and what is not. And what I found out was just because it's not appropriate doesn't necessarily mean it's illegal.
And the WAM handbook has no legally binding effects locally. Correct.
Absolutely. And so what we found out as related to a grant that the city had won, that there was definitely some misappropriate spending going on there, which made us dive a little deeper into the entire credit card statement from the city, and that would be we'd call a P card or a purchasing card,
right? And
that the mayor and a handful of other staff have, and take a look at those transactions and what's being spent on a day-to-day basis. And it was, is it really appropriate to buy yourself lunch while you're in town, not traveling, these kind of things? A whole host of questions came to light, and so I've been working very closely with the treasurer and the city attorney's office over the last several months to wrap the policies that apply to city employees around elected individuals as well, the mayor and city council, and to put very specific criteria in place as to what the P card can be used for.
Okay, and what did you come up with for an ordinance?
It's just about ready for prime time. It'll be on the it won't be introduced on the agenda on Monday, but 2 weeks from Monday. And really it limits that spending to we pluck pieces from the state, we pluck pieces from other entities, and basically said, look, you're not going to buy yourself lunch, you're not going to pay for $500 hotel rooms at the Westin on your way to or from here. You're not going to upgrade from economy to economy plus or business class or first class. Common sense things.
And these are all things that happened?
These are all things that happened, absolutely. Just common sense things that, as a matter of course, most people would say, look, I'm spending public money and I need to be appropriate about it. And so this ordinance will be coming forward and wrap the employee handbook around elected individuals and have some consequences there. It has to be put in ordinance because otherwise there's no teeth. You can't remove an elected individual like you would be a rank and file employee. So putting teeth in place and putting an ordinance and saying, if you do these things, there are consequences, and that could involve financial penalties as well as potential jail time.
Has there been any thought about drafting some kind of ordinance to allow for the removal of elected officials in the city? Because I don't believe one exists right now.
Yeah, I think that would have to be done on the state level.
Right, okay.
And, the city council does have the ability to take action and restructure the form of city government, so potentially vote on a city manager or a city administrator. But I've always held the opinion that if we were going to put that question out there, it should be the voters to answer and not 9 individuals from council.
And in fairness, they pretty resoundingly rejected it last time around.
They did, and my thoughts around that are that it wasn't designed well, and it wasn't the public wasn't educated as to what the end result would be. But I think from my perspective, the last 3 years have really shown that the CEO of the city should not be an on-the-job kind of training situation.
So you personally would favor city manager, city administrator?
What I have said in the past is I think we need to take a hard look at a interim city manager, somebody to come in that's professionally trained, level set every department in the city, and then move forward with a city administrator / mayor and city council type form of government. But things need level set. It's chaos at City Hall.
Is it really chaos right now?
That's what I could use, probably a whole host of other adjectives, but chaos is one that comes to mind.
Why is it chaos? Describe the scenario for me.
It's, in my day job, it's all about planning. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? How are you going to measure it at the end, right? And I just don't think that there is a clear end goal, and I think that often people are working, I don't want to say against each other, but toward different goals. So then the separation. So
isn't that politics, though? Don't you find that even in the U.S. Congress? Maybe especially in the U.S. Congress.
Find a lot of things in the U.S. Congress, and in some respects, our format of government created by our founding fathers is designed to have healthy debate and healthy discussion, so that it's not easy to get things passed and get things through. And that kind of thing. So the conversations, but one of the things I've heard over the last 3 years is that we have a strong mayor form of government, right? Well, we do have a strong mayor form of government, but we also have a strong mayor / city council form of government. So making unilateral decisions is certainly not what this is about. So,
and you feel that's happened?
I think in a handful of instances that it has over the last. One that comes to mind is. The Thomas Heights situation, where certainly there's a problem there that needs to be dealt with, but some legislation was brought forth to City Council, and City Council rejected that legislation, and the administration decided to move forward and go ahead and do that anyway. So
and run
and what
and run.
And run.
And run around the city council.
And run, yeah, and run, yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I've had James Johnson on the show, as you know, and he says the Cheyenne City Council hasn't stepped up and done their job. How would you respond to that?
I guess in what respect?
For example, on some of the spending issues that you kind of let it slide.
One of the big issues that Mr. Johnson had brought forward, particularly as related to a petition, was the Nation Way situation, right? And certainly how that all unpacked itself from A to Z was not a good situation, and it probably could have been handled in a better fashion. But the city, or maybe it was the potholes, I can't remember exactly, but the city council rejected whatever that situation was. So what is the basis for that petition, I guess?
Okay. And by the way, we have Cheyenne City Councilman Rocky Case on. If you have any questions or comments, we are taking phone calls, 632-6500, 632-3323. We were going to take a look back at the last year here. I do need to do a commercial break first, sure, and then we'll be right back. And good morning. We're back with Cheyenne City Councilman Rocky Case on Weekend in Wyoming. Looks like we have a caller. Rocky, good morning. You're on the air.
Good morning.
James Johnson here. So wanted to clarify on that petition. The idea behind it was to give the council an opportunity to actually hold the mayor accountable, and that was kind of the idea behind it. I mean, I know that they voted no on the potholes contract, and that's the first step for sure. But as far as the improper process that she took to basically, like you mentioned before, the end run around the council. So that was kind of my concern, and the reason why I pursued that petition, again, was to give the council an opportunity to hold her accountable.
And you and I have talked about this, Mr. Johnson, and I agree with the sentiment of what you're bringing to the table, but we held her accountable by voting no on the contract.
But I'm saying, as far as her role versus your role, you guys hold the money, she holds the executive power, and so the issue there is she tried to overstep her bounds, and it seems like she's being able to sort of get away with taking on the power of the purse for herself without any real accountability on the part of the council. Now, I know, Rocky, we've talked in private, but I know that you are working on a new ordinance to kind of hold her a little more closely accountable as far as her expenditures go. That's a good first step, for sure. But my concern is, when she misappropriated funds from that, was the Bloomberg grants, for example, even the city attorney, from what you told me, said was a crime, and yet she's not being held accountable in any sort of strict sense, other than, how do I want to phrase this? It's, as long as we catch it ahead of time, it's no big deal. It's kind of what it comes across as.
Yeah, I got some.
It seems like a half accountability measure
there, but
instead of actually holding her, somehow more accountable. Other than, we just have to vote her out next year.
James, we're having a really hard time hearing you. I think we're getting wind on your cell phone.
But just to kind of address that, it is not the city council. It is not our job to make a decision on whether or not a crime was committed. That would be, the law enforcement for sure. And
as I've said with you before, that's the first step, though, is me as John Q. Public or anybody else, we don't have the power to go to the sheriff's department or the district attorney or DCI. I mean, it has to be referred by the government body.
Yeah.
And I guess if you guys feel that there's no real criminal activity on her part, then fine. That's the stance that you guys are taking.
But it's not our call. I think that's really what it amounts to. Is it's not the city council's call. That would be, that would be up to the district attorney or up to a law enforcement entity. Really not our call to decide whether or not anything criminal took place. But the goal here is to put ordinances in place to ensure that these kind of misspending don't happen again, and that there are consequences if it does. So
what are the consequences? What are the consequences you guys are considering?
Well, the consequences, it would be an ordinance, and I believe the minimum is, what is it, $750 and 6 months in jail.
That's misdemeanor penalties typically in Wyoming. Yes.
Okay, so misdemeanor. All right, but I mean, she'd still be in office then.
I'm sorry.
She should still be in office then, is what you're saying, though.
There's no mechanism to remove a mayor from office.
There's no mechanism at the state level to remove a mayor from a first-class city. There are mechanisms for smaller municipalities and et cetera, but we're a first-class city, and there is no mechanism to remove an elected, and that would be a conversation to have with the state legislators.
I just feel that more accountability could be done. Again, I do applaud that you guys are taking those first steps as far as kind of holding her accountable on the expenditures sort of thing. Mm-hmm. It's just, you have to understand there's a lot of sentiment in the city, and I hear it on my end. I'm sure you hear it on your end too, either via email or via people on Facebook, that they just feel that this mayor is acting beyond her bounds and that she needs to be reined in a little bit more effectively, beyond just ordinances, beyond just rules that,
I think we'll all have that opportunity in November.
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, that's just, if she's done anything criminal of nature, that's basically letting her get away with some sort of crime because we just vote her out, but she goes away scot-free. And that's kind of the sentiment that people feel about it.
Hey, James.
Kind of understand where I'm coming from?
I need to move on, but I do appreciate the call this morning. Thanks, James.
Thank you,
Now, you did want to talk about, you did want to talk about several things that happened during the course of the year, probably more than we actually have time to address.
Probably.
But there were some issues that came up that you wanted to discuss.
Well, I mean, I've got a kind of a list here that are read out, but probably don't have time to dive into each and every one of them. But I had always questioned the quality of chip seal, for instance, and then we saw the kind of the results
Nation Way
of that,
situation.
the Nation Way situation, and there's a handful of others they don't have near the traffic, so they're not as big of a concern. But you know, the mayor may be looking at issues that more relate to the school district or the state level, and interjecting there. Certainly, some questions about the Christensen Road project and how that's been executed, turnover at City Hall.
Do we have a big turnover at City Hall?
I haven't had a chance to look at the spreadsheet, but I do have the spreadsheet built, and yeah, it certainly appears that from leadership down to the rank and file there is turnover. You know, the Stampede hockey situation.
Okay, refresh us on that again. I'm not sure everybody's familiar with it.
Basically, negotiations fell apart, and the Stampede said, "See you later, we're out." Right. So the flower pots, you know, we had some really nice looking flower pots that were just basically dug up and new pots put in.
And you feel that was an unneeded expense?
Well, yeah, it was absolutely. They were already planted, so maybe
18,000 is the number I heard.
Yeah, something like that. You know, certainly there was a social media blow up with one of the top 5 state electeds, and something about well, I probably can't say that word, but having a discussion as to whether it makes sense to bring the president of Taiwan to Cheyenne during Cheyenne Frontier Days, and the security and everything that goes along with that. You know, the truck and whether or not that was a gift. We could go on and on. There were a whole host of, but you know, to kind of button up and close things, there were some great things that happened as well. You know, we've got the municipal courts underway, and that's going to be a good thing. And Christensen is finally back on track due to, you know, a good new city engineer coming on board and taking. We bought the mobile stage for Fridays on the Plaza. We got Civic Center Commons over the finish line after a brutal fight from the very beginning of the administration. We got that kind of put to bed. We added vaping to the smoking ordinance, and let's see, we got the Mariah land to get access to the Belvoir Ranch. A whole host of great positive things that happened in 2019 that are kind of punctuated with a whole list of anomalies that probably could have been handled a little bit better.
Rocky, 2020 is an election year. Do you want to run for mayor?
No, I don't. You know, but that landscape's going to take place over the next few months, and May is 4.5 months away, right? So
still an open possibility.
We'll see what happens.
Are you on the ballot this year on your council seat or not?
I am. Yeah,
do you plan to run for election, or do you know?
Right now, my plan is to run for election.
You like being on the city council?
I do. I enjoy it. I think it's you know, how do I say this? More often than not, you hear the negative and not the positive. But when I'm out and about, quite often I get, hey, keep doing what you're doing. Keep asking tough questions. That's what you were elected to do. And if you don't like tough questions being asked, well, then maybe, you know, it's city, local governments maybe shouldn't be your job. I don't know. Have you heard anything about whether the incumbent's going to run for re-election as mayor? I've heard yes. I've heard no. I've heard maybe. And I don't have a crystal ball on that one. I think it's up in the air right now. And I've heard some other names of possible candidates. The only declared candidate I know was the gentleman, Mr. Johnson. James Johnson. Got another call? Oh, looks like we do have another call. And good morning. You're on the air. We'll have to keep it kind of short, but go ahead.
This is Duncan.
Hey, Duncan.
How you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Well, in lieu of trying to control the mayor's spending habits, wasting money, maybe you could come up with an additional ordinance to restrict her drinking habits as well, like a blood alcohol content test date on a daily basis or weekly basis, maybe?
Yeah, I'll just say I've heard the rumors, but those situations I think have a tendency to solve themselves as history unpacks.
Not really something you can comment on.
Right.
Okay. Thanks, Duncan. Okay, we're just about out of time this morning. We've got about 2 minutes left. And Rocky, any last thoughts for our audience this morning as far as the Cheyenne City Council, the upcoming ordinance, looking back at 2019, looking forward to 2020, or anything else?
So, I think most of the community's probably already heard it, and the mayor's campaign this year is Together 2020. And I'll just say actions speak a lot louder than words. And the last 3 years, a whole lot of there's a wake of damage that needs to be repaired, and I don't know that you can do that 75% of the way through the term. Can you just shift gears and pretend that the last 3 years didn't happen, and we all get together and sing Kumbaya and have a Together 2020, right? So maybe we can.
So you're not real optimistic on that one, though.
Again, actions and words, right? So.
Do you think there's room for cooperation in the city government that isn't there now, just in general?
Look, it's just all about professionalism,
uh-huh.
and if we bring professionalism back to the table, then I think communication is a possibility. But
Rocky, I did want to ask you about something. I messaged you about that this week. I guess there's going to be a proposal on reusable bags coming up. Is that right?
It's being talked about. There's nothing formal in front of City Council. I'm hesitant to take a position on it because that's a 30-minute conversation in and of itself.
A show by itself.
It really is. And, on its face, I hate to penalize businesses and consumers. The plastic bag industry, from my research, has done a lot to help out in terms of making these things more biodegradable. They kind of dissolve over time, and are they really making it to the ocean? There's a lot of questions around that, and I don't think that anything formal is coming before the city council anytime in the very near future.
Because I heard a rumor, which I messaged you this week,
right,
that there's going to be a proposal that would force stores to use the bags.
We've had some folks talking to us and I've talked to them as well over the last year, and it just hasn't gained enough traction to get a formal proposal in front of City Council.
I think Jackson does have an ordinance like that.
Yeah, Jackson does, and Steamboat does. A handful of communities do throughout the U.S. I would say if you can use reusable bags, go ahead and use them, and otherwise, but let business kind of be business. But
anything else on your horizon here, real quickly, because we're almost out of time, as far as the upcoming few months, ordinances or anything else you'd like to tackle?
Nothing really too exciting. I really keeping an eye on that Highway 30 and Pershing corridor, etc. So getting the state and the county and the city together to get that project on the rails.
Thanks for coming on, Rocky. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
And good morning once again. Welcome, Wyoming. Back with economist Sven Larson with Americans for Tax Reform. Am I right, Sven?
Yes.
You're an economist, well known also from your work previously with the Wyoming Liberty Group.
Yes, but I'm now with Americans for Tax Reform.
And we wanted to talk about some likely upcoming proposals in the Wyoming State Legislature, which, by the way, is now less than a month away. It's a budget session. And one thing that we wanted to chat about right off the get-go is a possible corporate income tax. Tell us what's going on with that.
Oh, wow. This one's been in the making for a long time. I think it's the third version of it we're seeing now. It started out as a gross receipts tax. Then that one died, and a legislator, an important legislator whose name I'm not going to mention, sent me an email, which I still have, saying that ship has sailed. It is never coming back again. Well, guess what? Last session, we saw it again in the form of a corporate income tax. They modified it after they lost last session. They modified it, and it came back in the form where it's called tax recapture. So that's where we are now. It's a 7% rate that would be paid by the previous version said only corporations with more than 100 shareholders within retail and I believe it was accommodations and restaurants. Now they've taken the industry classification away, so it's the only restriction on it now is 100 shareholders or more.
So basically, it's just a corporate income tax on larger companies.
Yes, and you know that the restriction, the shareholder restriction, is going to go away after a while. So all corporations would be paying it.
Are you concerned that this might be the camel's nose under the tent for a statewide income tax?
Absolutely, I have no doubt. If you look at the last page of that bill, they define the taxpayer by their IRS filing status. All they need to do, and I think that's intentional, because all they need to do then is essentially add the 1040 tax filing status and you have a personal income tax. Now, if they do that, it would be tied to the 7% rate or whatever rate in the future is on the corporate side. But there are states that do this, have a kind of calibrate the two. Not many, but there are examples of it. And I would not be surprised if that is exactly how they're doing it. By saying first, I predicted this back in 2016 already when I first heard rumors of an income tax.
We've been hearing about this for years.
Exactly, and you have too, absolutely. What I predicted back then was that they would start with the corporate side, because once you have a corporate income tax, you can go to people and say, well, the big corporations are now paying their, it's time for you to chip in as well. It's a lot easier. I mean, emotions are used very often in politics to get unpopular things done. So if this one goes through, it is not going to stop where it is. There's another reason why it would expand into the personal income tax also, is that corporations obviously are not private individuals, but there are individuals who run businesses that compete with corporations. So if you have an LLC, for example, you file under the personal income tax. So if you don't have to pay an income tax, but the corporation you're competing with has to do that, somebody could make the argument that's unfair, we have to level the playing field. And the way they're going to do it at that point, of course, is to introduce a tax on the individual side.
Do you think that's the end game here?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
is that a conscious thing that they're doing to incorporate an income tax?
Yes. I do believe that there are people in the legislature, far from all of them, but I do believe there are people in the legislature who reason along those lines. That I've been in this fight for 11 years, Doug, and I've spent the last 3.5 years exclusively focusing on fighting tax increases. And all my experience says that there is a long-term concerted effort at raising taxes. We've seen tax proposals for the past several years in the hundreds of millions if you tally them up. That is not a coincidence. It doesn't just happen. There is an intentional strategy behind it. They've tried so many different ways. Let me give you an example that ties into this. 3.5 years ago, when I first testified about Taxmageddon to the Revenue and Appropriations Committees, they laughed at me and said, no, we don't have any problem that we're going to solve with tax hikes. You're crazy. Go away. 3 months after my testimonies that summer of 2016, leading legislators start going out in media saying, oh yeah, we have a huge deficit. We need to raise taxes to do this. And guess what? We're going to pay for the schools with it, because otherwise your kids are going to run around in empty hallways with no teachers, and they're going to starve to death. That was essentially the sentiment that they presented. It was an emotional way to try to sell higher taxes. That is exactly the way they're going to do it here again. And there's a bill already on file that I can tie into this. We can get back to that in a second. But yes, this is a long-term strategy. We've seen them try gross receipts, corporate income tax, higher property taxes, higher sales taxes, higher excise taxes.
There's been talk of bringing the sales tax on groceries back at times.
I do believe that we're going to see, the Revenue Committee doesn't seem to want to move yet on filing bills, but we know the corporate income tax is coming. We know the lodging tax is coming. I believe the sales tax is going to come back again. If they do what they've done the previous years, they're going to pop these up right before the deadline and throw them in and try to make sure people don't see them. You got the property. There are two different versions of property taxes. As late as this fall, they tried again. The leadership of the revenue committee tried to get a property tax increase on the corporate side through. They've tried to get either raise the percentage or get more millings and do it on the personal side, the corporate side. It is coming back.
Okay, I'm speaking with economist Sven Larson with Americans for Tax Reform. We'll be back with more right after these words. AM 650 KGAB, Cheyenne's #1 news talk radio station. You're in tune with Weekend in Wyoming. We have economist Sven Larson with Americans for Tax Reform. We're talking about some likely proposals coming up in the upcoming legislative session to increase revenues. If you have any questions or comments, phone lines are open, 632-6500, 632-3323. Sven, just this week on KGAB.com, we posted an article about a bill that would pave the way eventually for a toll road on Interstate 80. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there is a bill on file already, SF6, to create a tolling authority. Now, there are two ways to slice this, and I'm for it and against it, depending on how you slice it.
Okay.
You can do it as a revenue reform, which means you simply slam it on top of everything else we pay, and that's not the way to do it. Because then, even though a toll, strictly speaking, is not a tax, it effectively becomes a tax and a tax increase, and that is not the way to do it. The way to do it is like a spending reform. You carve out, you take I-80 out of the state budget, out of WYDOT, put it as a separate entity, completely separate from the state budget. Then you fund it entirely with tolls.
Enterprise fund, essentially? Is that an enterprise fund, essentially?
Yeah, of sorts. Think of it as a utility that would run entirely on its own revenue. And then what you do is you create an opportunity to lower the taxes that go into to reduce the taxes that fund the rest of WYDOT, which means that you give relief back to drivers. Now, I'm not saying I'm for doing it exactly this way, but that is a concept that is worth discussing. The problem with the SF6 that I have is that they're going to place this under WYDOT. They're going to have a separate tolling fee account, and there are going to be some safeguards so that you don't take other taxes and plunge it into the tolled highway. But there is nothing that says, as far as I understand the bill, and I got to go back and read it again, but as far as my first reading of it goes, there is nothing that prevents WYDOT from milking the toll for using it elsewhere. There could be a safeguard. I want to say this. In the details, there could be a safeguard against it, but it was not apparent when I read the bill. And this concerns me because I think by setting it up as a revenue reform, not a spending reform, they are squandering a great opportunity to start discussing and implementing structural spending reforms that will reduce taxes as we go along.
What's the difference between a revenue reform and a spending reform exactly, for those who don't know?
Well, the revenue reform would simply introduce this and add it. I mean, we're already paying for WYDOT, we're paying for the highways through other taxes. This would simply just add to the cost. And that is how they've structured the bill. Because they want to create this under WYDOT. But I want them to take I-80 out of WYDOT, away from WYDOT. Let WYDOT handle the rest. Create something entirely new. Then we could privatize it. We could lease it out to a private company that would operate it. And then the tolls would be this would be like having Black Hills Energy or something run an entirely different operation that has nothing to do with the legislature. Maybe some fundamental legislation, of course, because it is a highway after all, but an absolute minimum of ties between the state and the highway. Then you would be looking at a concept that is interesting and worth talking about.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, and correct me if I'm not, you're kind of concerned about them using this as a cash cow for whatever else.
Yes. And unfortunately, this is sponsored by the Joint Transportation Committee, which means that it carries some clout and it is easier to get it into the session. And I'm glad they're starting to talk about reforming how government operates, but it would be much better if they took a step back and said, let's do it with the purpose of reducing the burden on taxpayers. That would have been a much better approach to this. And I have been in principle a proponent of tolls, but for the reason that you can actually reform spending and cut taxes along the way.
I should mention too, just as a side note, there is some question about imposing a toll road on a federal interstate, so that's something that may have to be hashed out if this moves forward.
Yeah. I just got back from the East Coast, and I have an easy pass that I use when I go on, for example, on the toll roads in Indiana, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Also, if you use the 495 around Washington, you can use that. There is a way to do it, apparently, because they can do it out there. But I understand, too, that there are legal concerns, and since I'm not an expert on that, I'll leave it to the lawyers.
Okay. Sven, just in general terms, what we've been hearing the last few years out of the legislature, and this hasn't changed, is, look, we face, and I've heard figures anywhere from $400 million to $1 billion shortfall over the next few years. Coal's going away. It's not coming back is the argument. We've got to impose some new taxes. How would you respond to that?
No, we've got to cut spending.
Can we cut enough spending to balance the budget?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I have on my website, Larson's Political Economy, I have listed 7 different spending reforms that we can do. The big kahuna there is school choice. If we do it the right way, we do ESAs out of Arizona, or we do the vouchers out of Wisconsin or some other model with the same effectiveness, we can cut costs by more than $300 million a year, and we can still educate our kids. They can get an excellent education, and we can get a lot more choice if we also protect homeschoolers so that they can continue unaffected by this, because I know there's a lot of people who want that. Medicaid reform, if we reform long-term Medicaid, if we have vouchers so people can buy their plans, health plans under Medicaid from out of state. I worked with this on this with Colin Simpson when he was Speaker in the House. We can cut costs by at the very least $150 million if we can do that. There are numerous other things we can do. All it takes to get there is an absolute, uncompromising no to any new or higher taxes. Once we take that off the table, we can have a conversation about spending reform.
You mentioned Medicaid. I understand Medicaid expansion is going to be back again for discussion. What are your thoughts on that?
I dread that. That is a boondoggle of major proportions. They say it's not going to cost us. It's a revenue. How is it a revenue source when you spend $100 to get 90? I just don't get that. I would love to hear somebody explain. Maybe Common Core Math can explain that, but I can't get it from. The cost is actually going to be north of $100 million if it plays out the way it does in some other states. The disaster in Montana is very telling. They saw a decline in Medicaid enrollment until they went ahead with Medicaid expansion. Then it flattened out and started increasing again. That is exactly what's going to happen. And we are very vulnerable because we have such a weak market for private insurance here. We would be putting taxpayers on hook for enormous amounts of money if we went ahead with that. And let me tie one thing into that. It's the mental health, long-term mental health issue that the governor brought up when he presented his budget. I fear that is going to be tied into Medicaid and or, especially, this is my real fear, being used as a vehicle to motivate the corporate income tax because the numbers are so close.
Sven, it looks like we have a caller. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Doug. Good morning, Sven. This is Lisa.
Hey, Lisa.
Hi, Lisa.
Sven, I know you're not with Wyoming Liberty Group anymore, but Glenn's had somebody on his show from there who had gone to a joint committee meeting, and somebody from the hospital actually testified that to what you were just saying, that you spend $100 to get $90.
Yeah.
You know who that was?
I don't know, but that is a very important point, and I'm glad you bring it up. because once we create Medicaid, once we do Medicaid expansion, it's not just that we have to pay money to get some federal funds. It's also that those federal funds are not reliable over time, and there is a cap for how much they pay. If we get a bigger enrollment that was projected when we created it, we are on the hook for 100% of that excess enrollment. This is why in every state that has created Medicaid expansion, it becomes a huge boondoggle, and all the conversation they have after creating it is on how they can raise taxes.
Sven, as I'm sure you're aware, because we've discussed this issue before, one of the arguments in favor of expansion is our hospitals are forking out $100 million a year for uncompensated care. This would help address that. How do you respond to that?
Let us do two things. First, three things actually. Number one, let's open up Wyoming to private insurance from other states. So anybody, not just Medicaid, but private insurance. You can buy your insurance plan anywhere in the country. Before Obamacare, we had 4,000 insurance providers in the country as a whole. We are slowly clawing our way back to that after this Obamacare debacle. If we can tap into that huge market, people can buy affordable, comprehensive coverage plans on a national market. So that's number one. Number two, what I said before about how to reform Medicaid. Number three, we have a crawling socialization of our hospital industry here in the state. We're slowly moving toward a system where only government would be providing hospital services. That is a cost increase in itself because there is no competition. We need to reform, get the private sector back on all these fronts. That is a way to reduce cost, make sure that more people are covered, and more people can actually pay their hospital bills.
Sven, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you're a native of Sweden, is that correct, where they have socialized medicine?
Yes.
How did it work there?
It's a disaster. You can, in a state like Wyoming, we would not have a single full-service hospital. You would have to. You might be able to get most of your treatment in the state if you're willing to travel 7 hours. You would be waiting 11 months for a knee replacement surgery. You would be dying waiting for cancer treatment that you can quite easily get here in America today. It's an absolute unmitigated disaster. There are people who have to sit and wait 11 hours at the ERs at Swedish hospitals because there are so few of them.
So do you think socialized medicine is being misrepresented as a panacea in the current presidential campaign?
Oh, without a doubt. I can't get it that they don't even. I mean, I don't think a lot of people aren't willing to do the research on it. No, it is going to bring us to a point where we have to raise taxes by incredible amounts. But we have to be aware at the state level. If we don't do anything, we might by default be creating it here. Medicaid expansion is actually a way to unintentionally create a socialized medicine system of sorts here in Wyoming. It opens the door for it because it becomes convenient for, I mean, we have a lot of small businesses that are struggling to provide benefits for the employers that they have. If you create Medicaid expansion, it's going to create an incentive for employers to dump their employees into that system, and you get a big enrollment increase.
Okay, we'll be back to wrap up with Sven Larson right after this. AM 650 KGAB, Cheyenne's #1 news talk radio station. Sven, we have roughly a minute and a half here left of our program. We could have easily done another half hour. We'll have you back again. But any last thoughts for our listeners here on anything that we didn't cover that you really want to talk about?
I want to point to go back to we talked about taxes before. I want to emphasize that don't focus all your attention on the corporate income tax. It's absolutely essential that we stop it, but it's not the only one that is coming. We have the lodging tax. I know there are some people who are for it in the industry. They think it's going to pay for advertising. I respect that argument, but it's a vehicle for raising taxes and take money for other purposes as well. Then
one of the arguments on the lodging tax is mostly out-of-staters pay it. How would you respond to that?
That is a point that has not been proven. I haven't seen any numbers to prove that. If they have it, I'd be happy to review those numbers. They say the same thing about the gas tax, but there is no way of there's no point of collecting the data you need to make that point, especially about the gas tax. If they have something on the lodging tax, I would like to see it. It's still a tax increase, and the way it's constructed now would put us at we would be one of the highest taxed states as far as lodging goes, if it goes ahead.
Sven, 10 seconds left. Any last thoughts here this morning?
Americans for Tax Reform is the only way to go if you want to fight taxes.
And you have a website, right?
ATR.org. And I have one. Just Google Larson's Political Economy.
Okay.
Where Cheyenne comes to talk. Join the conversation on AM 650 KGAB or at KGAB.com. Cheyenne's #1 news talk radio.
AM 650 KGAB, Cheyenne's #1 news talk radio station. Doug Randall with you here on Weekend in Wyoming. It's a weekly program we do from 11 to 1 on Saturdays, focusing on local topics. Right now we have Carla Thurin in. I think I got it right.
That's correct.
From the Safe House program here in Cheyenne. First of all, for those who don't know, what is the Safe House program?
So Safehouse Services is the agency in Laramie County that provides services to domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, elder abuse, dating violence, any violent victim of violence, basically where there's an intimate partner that's involved.
So it's not just husbands and wives fighting it out.
No, it is anybody who's in a relationship or maybe not even in a relationship. We do provide services to people that are being stalked also.
Oh, do we see a lot of that around here?
Honestly, yeah, a lot more than you might imagine here in Laramie County. We do stalking orders, and I bet we do 2 or 3 a week.
Lay out a typical stalking scenario for me. That wasn't something I knew you guys did, but it's kind of interesting.
So a lot of times stalking is basically happens at the end of a relationship. One party decides to leave the other party, and somebody doesn't want to give it up. And they start calling, they show up every place they're at, they're maybe monitoring their phones. Phones are really hard to, if once you intertwine your phone with somebody, they have access often to your whereabouts and where you're at. It's really hard to get that off there. They put you under surveillance, and then when you continue to tell them no or shut the door, they might start getting violent and make threats.
I'm going to ask a really dumb and really obvious question here. Why can't people just take no for an answer? That would put us out of business, actually, and that would be a good thing. But I don't know. It's it's really hard sometimes to be told no. And you can't force somebody to love you. I mean,
right.
That seems like common sense.
But like domestic violence and sexual assault, stalking, all of that is basically about power and control.
Okay.
And maybe it's not necessarily about love. It's just once you lose that power or control over somebody, then you branch out and start doing ridiculous things that is illegal most often.
Now, what are the laws on all of this?
So we do have stalking statutes, and the law enforcement put together cases. DA will prosecute on those, but sometimes when it's at the very beginning of it, we try to get it stopped just with a stalking order, and maybe let the offender know that the petitioner really means business, wants it to quit, wants you to stop trying to contact them.
So the first step's to get what I think they call a protection order. Do I have that right?
Right. So in Wyoming, we have 3 different orders that we provide services for. Family violence protection order, where somebody has to have you have to have a relationship, an established relationship, and then there has to be a harm or threat of harm in there. We have stalking order, where we show a continual pattern of stalking, and that there's intimate danger there. There's imminent possibilities of that danger. And then we also have a sexual assault order, where if there's been a sexual assault, we can put an order in place that keeps the other party away during the course of maybe prosecution or even just investigation.
Adjudication of the whole thing.
Right.
Now, your facility itself, you have 42 beds, I believe. Is that right?
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about the facility.
So we have our office is at 714 West Fox Farm, where anybody can come and seek services, talk to us about a protection order, safety planning, or any of that. Our shelter is in an undisclosed location, but we do have enough room for 42 beds, and we have kitchen space the bedrooms are all individual, but the kitchen, bathrooms, and those are shared. And it's very nice. It's nice for people to come and feel like that they are comfortable and they can call it home during the time that they're trying to seek some safety.
And how long do people typically stay there?
Typically, is a hard word to use because
what are some parameters? Well, maybe it'd be better.
So when somebody comes into shelter, we usually start out with a 30-day stay. Kind of, get your feet on the ground, figure out what you're going to do, what's your next steps, where would you be safe. Can you be self-sufficient? Often people that come into our shelter have no jobs, no vehicle, because they have been kept isolated. They've been kept totally away from the outside world. Often this happens. And so sometimes we start at the ground trying to figure out how we're going to get somebody to where they need to be. And then at the end of 30 days, if they are still in danger or they still are not prepared to be self-sufficient, we can give them another 30-day or up to a 90-day extension to try to help them get their feet on the ground. We won't turn anybody that's working hard to make their life better.
Now, I would assume you also have contacts in different legal organizations and help organizations to help these people get their lives back together. Would that be accurate?
We have some of the most amazing partners in Laramie County, but as far as legal goes, we do work a lot with Equal Justice Wyoming. There are several attorneys that will put in some pro bono time and meet with clients and help them to do that. Legal Services helps. And then we also have access to the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence. They have attorneys on staff, and then the University of Wyoming has a legal clinic for family law, and so we can often tap into those places to help people get some legal help.
Can you also point people in the right direction as far as maybe getting some job training or that sort of thing, finding a job maybe?
Right. We work very closely with Climb Wyoming. We work with LCCC. Sometimes some of our people that we see don't even have a GED, and so we basically, when they walk in the door, we say, what are the steps we need to take to help you become self-sufficient so you don't have to rely on that abuser or you have to return home to somebody who's harming you.
Now, we were chatting before going on the air, and you told me about a couple of trends you're seeing. One is you're seeing more male victims.
We are.
Tell us about that.
So, my assumption is, what I'd like to believe is that we've educated people well enough in our community to know what the consequences are to domestic violence. And so often when things are happening in a relationship, we are seeing men that won't fight back, and we are seeing some violent women. Often it's a lot to do with substance abuse, maybe that, they're drinking or they're into drugs and you do things that you normally wouldn't do if you weren't, or you get a little more brave and do some physical things that you probably wouldn't have done. We are seeing more men that are coming to us and asking for help getting a protection order and so they can keep that person away from them, so that they can be safe and maybe take care of their children or their whatever that is that they need.
Do men ever stay at the shelter?
No, we don't put them in our shelter for obvious reasons, but we do find an alternative place if a man does not have the resources or another place to go.
Does that happen sometimes?
Yes, it does.
Now, you also mentioned you're seeing an increase in elder abuse, I believe you said. Is that right?
We do, and that's probably the hardest thing for us to work with is more and more we're seeing elderly people who are letting their 50-year-old son or move back into the house because he's lost his job, often due to substance abuse, and they move back into the house. Then they take control of the house and maybe knocking dad down or pushing mom into a wall, and mom and dad love them and don't want to call the police on him, but really want him out of the house. And so we really work very hard to help them to see that their safety is more important than that their child's bed.
How common is that scenario?
Oh, probably several times a year we work with somebody.
So not unusual, at least.
Absolutely not, no.
Now, Carla, you mentioned substance abuse. I would guess just from doing local news here, you see a lot of those cases, and probably a lot of them involving either alcohol or crystal meth.
We do. We see a lot of that where people really they're not in their normal mind when they're using anything. And so you do things that normally wouldn't happen. You might hit somebody that you really do love, you know, and it causes a lot of things that go on that it's just a trickle down effect, and it just keeps going, and pretty soon maybe a child is hurt, and it wasn't their normal behavior.
And I would suspect that, and this may not be something you're directly involved with, but the abuser would probably, oh, honey, I was drunk. I'm so sorry. I won't drink anymore.
So that's definitely the cycle of violence. We see that often in a cycle of violence. You start out with everything's great, perfect, life is good, and then it gets tension building, and then there's a major blow up, and at the end of that blow up you often see the abuser, hearts and flowers and roses, and I will never do this again, and I love you so much, give me another chance, and it goes right back into the cycle.
How can I phrase this? Does the promise of it will never happen again ever actually happen that way?
Very seldom.
Very seldom.
Very seldom does that happen.
So basically, if somebody's gotten physical with you, they'll probably do it again.
Most likely they will.
Okay. And again, I'm speaking with Carla Thurin, Executive Director of the Safe House Program. We will be taking, in fact, we are taking phone calls if you have any questions or comments. 632-6500, 632-3323. Back with more right after these words. AM 650 KGAB, Cheyenne's #1 news talk radio station. You're in tune with the Weekend in Wyoming program. We are live on the air. I'm speaking with Carla Thurin, Executive Director. I got that right, didn't I?
Yes.
Of the Safe House program. We're talking about Safe House Services, some general things about domestic violence and the accompanying issues that surround it. We were just chatting off mic, and you were telling me, because you've been there for a while, you're starting to see children come in. Well, they're not children anymore, but people who were children and stayed at the shelter, and now they're coming in as victims. Is that right?
That's correct. I've been at Safe House for 21 years, and years and years ago I was a shelter manager, and there was children in my shelter who remember me as a child, and now they're the adult bringing their children into our shelter. So they've cycled and got into a relationship just like they lived through when they were a child, and so it's just repeating itself. The cycle is just following itself, and now they're bringing their children into our shelter.
Now, the question I put to you was, why don't people just learn from this? But apparently it doesn't always work that way.
You know, it's really difficult. When you're growing up, no matter what, you become really familiar with what goes on in your house, and it's comfortable. And you understand that. So if dad is hitting mom, you understand that. You might not understand in a relationship where people were kind to each other, and so it becomes familiar, and that's what you look for. And not that everybody does that, because some people can break that and do walk away from it and get totally away from that kind of relationship. But sometimes it's just what makes you familiar.
Now, as far as the program itself, let's walk through it. How do people avail themselves of your services? What's the process?
So we have a crisis line that's manned 24/7. The office is Monday through Friday. And a lot of people call our crisis line just to get information. A lot of people call our crisis line for information for a friend, just to find out what goes on. But we get so many referrals from law enforcement, from the hospital, from other agencies, from schools. Anybody that maybe they're working with somebody that discloses domestic violence, the best thing to do is to call us right away and see what we can do to help.
Now, I've heard there's a typical pattern that tends to be followed that starts with somebody isolating a person from their friends and some other steps that are typical. Walk us through that, if you would.
So isolation is a huge thing, and you might think you're living in downtown Cheyenne with a neighbor 20 feet from your door. You're still isolated often. The abuser may not let you call your family, convince you that the family doesn't like them, so you need to stay away. If you love me, you'll stay away from your sister. You can't talk to the neighbors. I'm pretty sure that they're crazy. I mean, different things that keeps them isolated. Pretty soon they take their phone away or take their mode of transportation. Anything they can do to keep control of that relationship. But most often it begins with telling a victim who they can talk to and who they can't.
So are there red flags when you're dating somebody that might show themselves, or is that too early in the process?
We have a handout called 11 Ways to Spot a Loser Lover, and I always joke around, don't take it on your date and check it off, but
that might not make the best impression.
Right. Your first date might be a little bit odd, but it's a great thing to put in mind. Like, this is totally a red flag, the way that they're behaving and the things that they are expecting me to do or not to do.
What are some red flags?
Control, big control issues, where they don't want you to talk to anybody, what you wear, where you're going. They might call and call and call just to see if you're where you're supposed to be. Are you where you told me to be? People talk about they're just started dating somebody and they seen them sitting outside their work watching their work to make sure they're there.
That right there would kind of weird me out anyway. I mean, isn't that just common sense?
But so many people say it's because I love you so much,
and that's pretty much the cover for a lot of this stuff, isn't it?
Absolutely, they use all of their power and control and cover it up with love words.
I think you're a pro in this field and I'm not, but just from doing news, I think sometimes too, there's the thing about, well, you made me do it. I just love you so much, and I just get so mad.
Right. I punched the hole in the wall because you got me so angry, and I did that.
It's your fault.
Right. That's right. And it usually always is. It's transferring the blame right back onto them, and that is a huge red flag. If somebody is trying to, you've got to know when. What part of that did I take part of? And if I wasn't to blame, then you're crackers.
Now, you mentioned punching a wall. Does that count as domestic violence?
It does. It really does, because so many people use that as any kind of power and control. It might be breaking something like you inherited your grandmother's china, and they break the pieces one at a time just to prove to you that they can.
That could be as bad as getting hit for a lot of folks.
Some people
sometimes maybe.
Yeah, some people indicate to us often that if he would just punch me in the face and get it over with, it would be so much better, because it is quicker and it's done and over with.
Now, as far as the service itself, how are you funded?
We are primarily grant funded through the state and the federal, but we rely very, very heavily on our United Way partners. Our United Way helps us to have unrestricted funds that we can use any way that we see fit. So in a month, our monthly electric bill is $1,500 a month.
Oh, wow.
And in a month where it's like super cold and we go up a little bit, we have a little extra funding that way. We do get some city and county money, and then we really very desperately depend on our community, and our friends will make donations to us, whether it's money or which we use for gas cards. We help people that need to get gas in their vehicle so they can get to work. We have so many friends in our community that will provide us with towels and hygiene items and toilet paper and things like that to keep us afloat.
Do you have enough of what you need, or how's that work?
We almost always could use more, and financially, we use any kind of donation we get to make sure that we take care of the needs of our clients. So right now, currently, we are building pet kennels at our shelter, because so many people that we've worked with don't want to leave their abuser because they can't leave their pets behind.
I totally understand that.
Right, and so they're scared to death if they leave the dog behind, it will be killed. And so they want to bring the pet with them. Now, we have a great partnership with the Cheyenne Animal Shelter. They house our pets there in a private, undisclosed room where just our clients can go in and visit their pets. But occasionally we have somebody that comes in at 2 a.m. We can't get a hold of the animal shelter and try to make that happen, or it's an emotional pet, or there's a reason they need to have it with them. So we are building kennels right now that we would be able to house, and we took the carpet out of a couple bedrooms and put hardwood down so we can try to house. We got to be very considered of other clients, because there might be allergies,
right.
There might be, and we do have to be careful about somebody's dog that may only like them.
Right.
And so we do have a lot of rules to get into place there, but we're working on that. So our community's been talking to us a little bit about that, because we're going to start in the near future. We're going to start looking for dog beds, and we on my staff's wish list, I guess there's like a cat house where it's like 3 tiers and you can put a cat in there so they're not just stuck in. We're looking at stuff like that we want donated to be able to help our clients out that and make our place a little more pet friendly.
How common is it for an abuser to attack someone's animal as a way of getting at them?
way more common than way more common. I just recently, just within the last couple weeks, we were working with a gal who, during the time she was in her office filling out a protection order, her abuser was at home and he harmed the cat. And then they spent $1,000 at the vet afterwards to get the cat back to health.
So that's a pretty common thing.
It's horribly common, and so many abusers use children over and over and over again.
How does that work?
So they if you leave me, you'll never see the kids again. There's not a judge in this town that would believe that you're capable of taking care of them, or they might just take them and disappear with them and stuff like that. And so when we're working with people who either have a pet that's being at danger, or a child at danger, it's so hard to work with that victim because they can't see themselves away from that situation, and they often feel like it's better just to return to the abuser than to risk losing their children or their pet.
And a lot of people would argue that our animal cruelty laws in this state maybe aren't tough enough to dissuade some people. Just toss that out there.
Yeah, and that could be, we work really hand in hand with the coalition, the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence. They have a lobbyist and that helps us to make those penalties harder.
Carla, we have just a little under 3 minutes left. Is there anything you would like to cover that we haven't talked about this morning?
I think I'd like your listeners to know that our crisis line number is 637-7233. It's 637-SAFE. And you can call it 24/7 if there's any time that you feel like you're in danger, or if you just want to know what your options are. And often if I do nothing more, I want a safety plan with somebody and tell them where's a safe place to fight. If you're not going to leave your abuser, make sure you're fighting, or the abuse takes place, or whatever's taken place, you are not in a garage where there's more weapons, or a kitchen. Don't
Isolated
get yourself
place.
backed into a bathroom. Make sure that you maybe have a hidden phone. All phones, even if they have no service to them, can call 911. So hide one under your bed or in the closet or someplace where you can get to it to call 911 if they take your phone away. And then the minute that the dispatch picks up that phone, you shout your address, because they don't have a way to track a phone that doesn't have service to it.
Carla, do we see any correlation between good or bad economic times and domestic violence in general?
I don't think so.
Not really? Because that's one of the beliefs that people have, I think.
Yeah, I think that it is what it is. People, nothing, you can't blame. While substance abuse makes it worse, you can't blame that, because if somebody knows that drinking makes them violent, you would think that don't drink. Right. And so if finances are making you angry, then you need to go get some help. You need to find some place where you can to do that. So I'd love to have excuses for people that harm their loved ones, but there really is none.
Almost out of time here, but quickly, do domestic abusers ever change?
I have seen very few change, but I have seen them. And
it can happen then.
It can happen, but the victim cannot make them change. You can't love somebody enough to make them change. They have to make that decision, and they have to go do it themselves.
Okay. And again, I've been speaking with Carla Thurin, Executive Director of the Safehouse Services program. I believe it's just right here in Cheyenne. Is that Laramie County too? Or
it's all of Laramie County.
Okay. And we've been talking about some of the services they offer, as well as the general problem of domestic violence. Do you have a phone number or website where people can contact you?
Crisis line 637-7233, and then our webpage is wyomingsafehouse.org.
Can people make donations there by chance?
Absolutely. We take donations anyway. And then we also have a Facebook page.
Thanks, Carla. I appreciate it. AM 650 KGAB, Cheyenne's #1 news talk radio station. We've got about 25 minutes left in the program today. We're going to do some open phones to wrap up the program. So if you have anything on your mind pertaining either to any of the guests we had on today, or just, life in general, phone lines are open. 632-6500, 632-3323 are the telephone numbers. If you weren't with us, first of all, we had Cheyenne Councilman Rocky Case on talking about an ordinance to set some parameters for spending by city officials. That was followed by Sven Larson, economist with Americans for Tax Reform. Sven talked about some likely upcoming issues in the state legislature, actually tax proposals. And then we just heard from Carla Thurin, executive director of the Safehouse Services program here in Cheyenne. And by the way, we'll probably be posting all of this on our website this coming week at KGAB.com. If you have anything on your mind, give us a call, 632-6500, 632-3323. I thought it was sort of interesting, Sven Larson talking about possibly the corporate sales tax proposal. He feels that might be basically a stalking horse for a statewide income tax. If you recall, last year the legislature did consider and reject a bill that would have imposed a corporate income tax on basically retailers and I believe lodging industry businesses, if I remember correctly, that had 100 or so shareholders, 100 or more shareholders. A lot of the legislative leadership was behind that. However, it got in the legislature. There was quite an outcry about it. They said supporters of the bill that they were aiming at people like Walmart to try and keep some of that money in state. A lot of people certainly not enthused about that notion. That did go down to defeat. Now they will, as I understand it, be putting forward another corporate income tax bill this session that will be phrased just slightly differently. It would take away the restriction on industries. If I remember what Sven said, basically would still include the 100 shareholders as the dividing line. But Sven says he thinks that it's really, at least on the part of some supporters, just an opportunity to impose a state income tax, with the argument at some point being, well, look, Walmart's paying their fair share, why aren't you? And that would lead to a personal income tax of 7%, and he says that has already been done some places. So I don't know what you think about that. Interesting idea. Maybe you think we need a state income tax. It is something that's been proposed the last few sessions. I know Kathy Conley, a Democratic representative from Laramie, last session did propose both a corporate and a personal income tax. That really didn't go anywhere, but it was something that was proposed, and it's come up before, as long ago as the 1990s. I remember when I was doing local news here, and I believe they had a commission called the Tax Reform 2000 Commission. I could be wrong on that, but they studied the possibility of a corporate and personal income tax in Wyoming. Their argument was that a personal and corporate income tax was actually a fairer way to tax people than was, say, property taxes or something of that nature. Governor Geringer, I'll never forget it. Governor Jim Geringer put out a 2-word press release, the only one I've ever seen in my life, to their study, said, hell no. The only 2-word press release I've ever seen in my life. But in any case, it is something that's been discussed for a long time. Probably an issue that's not going away. Supporters would argue that coal is not coming back. Now, there are people who feel that's not necessarily true. The coal industry is certainly in decline. And you can get into some other issues on that. For example, a coal port on the West Coast that Wyoming would like to see built, and that's something that so far has been blocked. It's something that the states of Oregon and Washington are less than enthusiastic about. There has been some consideration of building one, I believe, also in British Columbia, Canada, and I haven't researched that recently, but there are some issues with that. The idea being that if Wyoming could market its low sulfur coal to places like Taiwan, Japan, some of the Pacific Rim nations, that we could open up some whole new markets, and perhaps that might mean maybe coal isn't going away as a revenue source. Good afternoon. You're on the air.
Hi, Dad. This is Micah.
Hey, Micah.
What I don't understand is Wyoming is always talking about trying to get more people to move in, finding more things that attract people here so that they do come, they spend their money, they buy the houses, whatever.
Uh-huh.
And then they turn around and try to make up proposals to pass things that are exactly what people don't want to do.
Like an income tax, for example?
Like the income tax, for example. I mean, Florida has it great. I mean, so many people go down there because, once they're retired, they're on a fixed income. It's affordable. So here we are in a state that is currently affordable. We've really got to just boost up more things to attract more people here.
Mm-hmm.
But by making it impossible for people to afford to live here, that's not the solution. That's part of the problem.
Now, Micah, I have heard people say they don't want more people to move here. How would you respond to that?
Well, that's true. So, I think it's just like maybe the national immigration laws where you have a limit on how much growth can take effect. But, I think over time things usually work themselves out. I mean, we certainly moved here partly to get out of the congestion of the East Coast swamp, so to speak. But, at the same time, if you don't have people, if you don't have businesses and everything, the people who are here are going to suffer because there's not going to be any income, there's not going to be any services, there's not going to be any resources.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a dicey situation, but you certainly want to find a way to make things affordable, but also attractive in a way that doesn't bring every Tom, Dick, and Harry into town. I mean, if nothing else, we want to be a nice place to visit. But for those of us living here, we've got to be able to afford to stay living here.
Absolutely. Hey, Mike, I appreciate the call this afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
Bye. AM 650 KGAB, back with more right after these words. Cheyenne's #1 news talk radio station, AM 650 KGAB. Phone lines are open 632-6500, 632-3323. How do you feel about a state income tax? Do you think it's something that there are people in the legislature that maybe want to implement, or maybe you support a state income tax? Maybe you feel that we've got to find some way to pay the bills, and that the coal is not in fact coming back, and that's one of the key arguments for increasing revenues is basically the coal industry is in decline. Is that permanent? I don't know. There are people who say that it is. There are people who say that it isn't. One thing that they're trying to do with coal certainly is find some new uses for coal, for example, manufacturing materials and that sort of thing. Good afternoon, you're on the air.
Hey, good afternoon, Doug. Eric here.
Hey, Eric, what's up?
No income tax. No, we don't need it. The only thing we need to do is learn how to manage our money.
What do you think the state could do to maybe cut spending a little bit in some intelligent ways that wouldn't really hurt people?
Well, you got to start trimming the dead wood. All right, you got to get rid of the dead wood. Don't replace the jobs. Computers have done that mainly.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't that the thing since the advent of the computer? Was to make things easier. Put things into record and do research at the same time. Budget. Now, I had them talking about putting toll roads on I-80. Well, do you know, do they realize what that would do to the independent truck driver that cannot afford that toll going across the state? That's 400 miles, right?
Well, another argument in that same vein is that, a lot of our communities along the interstate make money from truck drivers passing through, and that if we put a toll road in, they're just going to go through another route.
Yeah. They would just find a way, and then they'll be coming through small towns, high traffic to small towns where people are used to living a more serene life, and the kids are playing. We have. I grew up as a free range kid. I don't know about you. I didn't need supervising everywhere I went.
Well, in my day, we weren't playing video games in the house either.
Right, exactly. So we were active. And there are communities where kids are still active, and then you have heavy traffic coming through there and whatnot. And not only that, but I always thought that interstates were federal roads.
Well, and let me stop you right there. There is a big conversation about that.
Yeah.
Whether in fact they can actually implement a toll road on an interstate. Now there are some existing toll roads on interstates.
Right.
My understanding is those were grandfathered in at some point. That those were toll roads previously that interstates connected to. Now I could be wrong on that, but that's my understanding.
Yeah. See, the first interstate was New York State Thruway. All right. Eisenhower started that. All right. And the reason why Eisenhower started that, he wanted a road that was built so good that it would last, for a long time. And he got that idea from the Autobahn in Germany when they were coming from, I think it was Darmstadt to Frankfurt, and they were worried about the tanks tearing up the road, and then the supply chain would be interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And once he found out you couldn't tear up 28 inches of concrete for a tank. So, and that was the thing. And New York State Thruway was built to evacuate New York City in case of an emergency.
Right.
All right. Now, New York State takes care of it. All right. You don't have a toll road getting on to the New York State Thruway because it's still federally funded. All right. The minute you put your hands on it and put up toll booths, you're going to lose the federally fund. All right. Now, our population hasn't grown, all right, and people say, well, we need an income tax. No, it hasn't grown, not transfer. As a matter of fact, it's like a give and take. Some people move in, a certain amount move out, And so, and this thing about income tax and money, that's just making government bigger and more expensive, as far as I'm concerned.
Now, Eric, as you probably know, because I know you pay attention to what goes on in the legislature, some Democrats in the Wyoming legislature the last few years have argued that, hey, we've cut it to the bone. There's no room for cuts. What do you think about that?
I think it's another snow job. Okay,
so
we got enough blizzards.
So, do you have any ideas where we could cut? I mean, are there programs that you think are? Go ahead.
Yeah. We see every time someone retires out of government here, they figure out how to replace it, and necessary is. They haven't been replaced a long time ago because they have tenure, and you can't move them out. Now, you have, with the advent of the computer, all right, it had made a lot of jobs obsolete when it comes to clerical paperwork and all that. It
right.
has. You don't have big typing pools anymore. Come on, So when these people retire and move out, all right, hey, I think that the people who've been operating the computers can still do their job.
How about divisions of government? Are there some you think are not really worthwhile?
Well, I do believe that. I believe we have a system that is where two divisions are actually competing against each other, basically doing the same job. You know what I would like to see, Doug?
What's that?
I would like to see that one day, say if you had the power to do this, all right, that I want a detailed description of your job. Put it on paper. I want to see it in a half an hour. And then you'll find out how everybody is claiming they're doing the same job.
Hey, Eric, I have another caller coming in, but I do appreciate the call this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. You have a good day.
You too.
Right, bye.
Good afternoon. You're on the air.
Hey, good morning, Doug. This is Frank from the South Side.
Hey, Frank, what's up?
Oh, just got my chores done. Good show.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Rocky Case did a good job. A couple points on the city. I understand that 53 people have left the city employment since this mayor has been sworn in. Now, I don't know the distribution of rank and file to management. Management you can turn over every couple of years. I got no problem with that. But to people that are skilled in the trades should be taken care of and not run off the job. The other thing is this latest act in the circus of her husband getting arrested and all this. That's enough of this nonsense. And the city council has got to pass resolution of no confidence, resolution calling on her to resign. I know they legally can't get rid of her, but got to embarrass her out of office, or at least so she doesn't run again.
Would that achieve that, though?
Well, who knows? Didn't really have much opposition last election. I'd like to see John Palmer run again. He ran against Case, and I met him, talked to him a couple candidates nights. He's a good, down-to-earth guy.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody like that. We don't need a brain surgeon to be mayor, but we need somebody to take care of business.
Do you have any other candidates in mind you'd like to see run in particular? Or?
Oh, Pete Laybourne.
Pete Laybourne?
Yeah, Pete and I are about 180 degrees opposite politically,
mm-hmm.
but he's an honest man, and he's a hardworking guy, and politics doesn't really play that big a, left-right deal, doesn't play that much of a part in city government. I think he would be a real good mayor. to run. I think he'd straighten things out and run it as a business as it should be.
Now, Frank, as you may have heard when we were talking with Rocky, he said any ordinance that would allow for the removal of an elected public official would have to go through the legislature. Do you think that's something they should tackle?
Oh, I don't know if they necessarily need to do that, but they can do stuff just to embarrass her out of office, and I think that could be done. I mean, this is one, debacle after another. The Bloomberg money. What are we taking money from that commie rat for? And then we didn't spend it right. Then we had to pay it back. Come on, what's going on? This is crazy. And then that last thing with her husband is just, okay, give her an out. She needs to resign to take care of personal business. I understand that. And I've heard your one caller, Duncan, called in. I've heard that too from more than one source, but I don't really want to go into it.
Right, absolutely.
As far as Sven, very good interview with Sven, and we've got to stop this taxation.
How do you feel about an income tax? Do you think there are people in the legislature who are trying to get that through sort of surreptitiously?
Well, I got news for you. We got it. When the State Department of Revenue tells you to tax your labor, now what are you going to call that?
Mm-hmm.
A rose by any other name smells just as sweet. It's a tax on my labor. I fought the Department of Revenue for 8 years, came away with a 90% victory. I said, that's it, I'm through.
Mm-hmm.
But when they tax your labor, that's a tax on my income. That is an income tax. And we've got it, and this is going all across the state. They're collecting revenue from used goods and Meals on Wheels. When the goods are donated, and when you make a deal and buy something from them, it's a donation. They're taxing that. Now, if they collect taxes where it's not due, how are you ever going to figure out it's missing when you go to count the till? I think there's some shenanigans going on all across the board in government.
Hey, Frank, I appreciate the call this afternoon.
Okay, Doug, you take care.
Have a good one.
Bye.
AM 650 KGAB, wrapping up another segment of Weekend in Wyoming. Looks like we have a caller on the line. Good afternoon. You're on the air.
Good afternoon. I missed some of your first section, but one thing I think I heard you say, which is incorrect, that most people leave, the interstate highways are not owned by the federal government.
Okay.
They are owned by the state in which they're constructed.
Okay.
The government paid up to 90% of the cost, but they don't own them. That's one thing. Another thing, to get a toll, you need permission from Congress.
Right.
To toll a previously free interstate. And like Eric, I was born and raised in the New York City area. I'm very familiar with tolls on highways, bridges, tunnels, whatnot.
Uh-huh.
And putting a toll on 80 is not going to help anything. It's going to hurt. And putting an income tax is baloney. These people are overstaffed and overpaid. Get rid of the fat, get rid of the waste, and then we'll have surpluses. I just drove to the East Coast and back. It used to be Wyoming was the cheapest gas state.
Right.
Not anymore.
How do we compare with some of the other states? Are we a lot higher, or?
We're higher. The only state I paid as much or more as Pennsylvania was New York, as Wyoming was Pennsylvania and New York.
Mm-hmm.
Even Illinois, which used to be the highest, was lower.
Mm-hmm.
I was in some states where it was $2.16 a gallon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and other states, $2.30 was about the average.
I think I paid $2.73 the other day, if I remember right, something like that.
I guess if you remember when they were talking about raising the tax, they said that it wouldn't be passed on, it wouldn't affect us. Well, these are the same people that are telling you that we need an income tax.
Well, and it used to be that when you drive south to Colorado, you would want to gas up here because it was cheaper. I'm finding that's no longer necessarily the case.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And I say going east to Pennsylvania and New York, it's the same thing. It's no longer cheaper in Wyoming.
So do you think that the state can do anything to raise revenues, or do you think they just need to cut spending?
It's cut spending. The more revenues they raise, the more they'll find a way to spend it, hire people. And look at the staffing of this state compared to the population.
It's pretty high.
And they say, oh, it's because the land area is so great. Well, the land area of Alaska is greater proportion, and they don't pay that. they've lived off the fatherland so long on coal and whatnot that now that they have to face up to the harsh realities, they don't want to do it.
Well, hey, we're almost out of time this afternoon, but I do appreciate the call.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
Talk to you later. AM 650 KGAB, and that's about going to wrap it up. I sure appreciate all the calls here this afternoon. We're going to close it up for another edition of Weekend in Wyoming. We'll be back next week, 11 to 1, right here on AM 650 KGAB, Cheyenne's #1 News Talk radio station.